thanks everyone. I'm just really honoured that I've come all this way and you guys have like given up your evening to listen to me waffle on about things what happen in Suffolk. So I'll try not to be too long, but do tell me because I literally will talk for hours so just be careful. So a little bit about our story or where we come from. Do you want to press it? Yeah. So this is me, Jonny. That's the cheese, Baron Bigod. We'll come on to this cheese a little bit, but I'm just going to talk a bit about the background of the farm, so you get an understanding of where we come from. It really helps with, explaining why we ended up making this cheese. So we come from, our farm is based in Suffolk in the UK. It really helps with this map, that's us, with the bump. East Anglia is mostly a sort of flat area, but it has this wonderful little valley which, between the two counties of Norfolk and Suffolk, the Waveney Valley runs, it eventually goes out to the Norfolk Broads, which was, I don't know if you ever heard of that, it's in one of David Bowie's songs it's referenced. We're in this valley. It's a pretty little place on the outskirts of Bungay, an old market town which was referenced in the Domesday Book with William I. So William the Conqueror, who came over to England in 1066, and with him came his noblemen, or also known as barons. They're referenced as barons, and one of the barons was this guy called Bigod. And Bigod, as William the Conqueror came over and conquered England, he then put his noblemen into different sections of England to sort of like make sure there was no uprisings, or to try and keep everything under control. And the Bigod family was one of those people. And the generations, a couple of generations on from the original Bigod, was this guy called Hugh Bigod, and he built a castle in the town of Bungay, and that's where we named our cheese after. And we like the connection. There's several reasons why we called the cheese Baron Bigod. Firstly, it sounds like a cheese, like the cheese Baron, like Baron. It kind of sounds like it should be a cheese, but it was. I love the connection between this French guy who came over to England. From Normandy, which is famous for its bloomy rind cheeses. So that's where the name come from. And our farm looks, Bungay is this sort of little hill in a hole. It looks down on all of our marshes, and you see the cows grazing and stuff. In the background there, you see St Mary's Church, an old church, very very pretty church, and it sort of just pokes over the top of the valley. So the farm itself. Along that, Norfolk and Suffolk is mostly arable farming, but in the Waveney Valley it's a floodplain, and the grass, you can't do anything but grow grass, so it lends itself to sort of dairy farming, cows along that valley. And there's been a lot of farms over the decades before now, where people had small herds of cows and milked those cows. Gradually, as the years went by, those farms grew less and less. People got out of cows for various reasons, and we, as the Crickmore family, I'm third generation of our business, and we bought the farm in the late 1940s. So we've been farming there for whatever that is, 70 something years now. And we've gradually, as time has gone by, we've worked hard and managed to buy another bit of land or rent it, and we got to gradually grow our herd in numbers. So going back to when I was a child, in the 1980s, we had about 70 cows, and gradually, as time has gone by, we sort of moved to about 300 animals on our farm. Through the 1990s and 2000s, I as a child, I just wanted to be a farmer. I love cows. There's something about their sort of big, sort of like wet noses and like they're, you know, like, I don't know, there's something really special about them. They come off and like, you know, like just stand there silently expecting a cuddle or something, you know, but they don't show like smiley faces or anything like that. They just sort of stand there silently waiting for that, you know, it's just silly things really. But I've always loved cows, and when I left school, I literally did my GCSEs. I didn't go on to any further education. I just got into farming immediately and started milking cows, and it's sort of like, as a sort of person in my teenage years and in my 20s, I never went anywhere because I just worked all the time, and I only ever saw the things, you know, the things around me, which was other dairy farmers and what they were doing, and I learned like, you know, because you only learn from what you see or what you visit or what you know it. So if you're only ever like in a small circle of other farmers in that valley, you only ever pick up what other farmers do, and you try and progress and learn, but it's only from what you see around you. And what I saw around us was Holstein cows with high yielding, and I thought that's the way forward. So we need to, like, you know, we started to breed our British Friesians to Holsteins. I don't know if you want to move the slide on. So these are the cows we used to have. There's a picture of my father and my uncle there. That room we'll see again in a minute, in a different format. But these cows we bred to Holstein, and gradually the industry changed so much in that sort of 1980s to 1990s. The UK, the dairy industry was sort of it was publicly owned, the processing part of it, the Milk Marketing Board in the UK, and we as farmers all had quota. We were only allowed to produce so much milk, and that all went to the Milk Marketing Board. The Milk Marketing Board produced, you know, various products, milk, butter, cheeses, and that's how the industry ran. But then Margaret Thatcher decided to privatise the dairy industry, and at that point it was a free-for-all, and milk processors began, you know, small milk processors started off trying to like persuade dairy farmers to get in a contract with them to sell them the milk, and through the 90s we saw all of these small processors fighting to have dairy farmers contracts, paying good price, but unfortunately so many of them got it wrong and went bankrupt, and the one that we were selling our milk to went under, and we lost all of our money from you know, that at the end of the day a dairy farmer only has one source of income, and that's from the milk processor. So they, you know, all your income is coming from the milk from that month. So we lost all of that. So it was a difficult period, and on top of that, as our progression of, because when we're talking cows, we're not talking like a few months. It takes years of like breeding and genetics to get your cows to, you know, to where you want them, and gradually as the years went on, we bred our cows to get more milk from them, because it kind of made sense, because if you're being paid, you have no control over what you're getting paid. If no one is prepared to pay you more, you think of ways of how can I like progress in my business. So you think, well, if I can get more milk from my cows, then that makes sense, doesn't it? Because, you know, like I've still got the same amount of cows, but I get more milk from the cow. That in theory makes more profit. But what actually really happened wasn't that at all, because at the end of the day, a cow is a cow, and you can't magic milk from a cow. What goes in comes out. So you have to feed the cow more energy. So what we were finding at that point was what worked well in the 1980s with our cows going out into those pastures and eating grass, which was quite cheap food, is that we were just replaced, to give the cow more energy, to produce more milk. The cow cannot get that from grass on its own. So she has to have bought-in concentrate food, which is like things like rape meal or soya or like starchy things like wheat, which all are expensive foods. So we started to get into this world of like buying in foods, but the trouble was they cost a lot of money. So actually you were fooling yourself thinking you were actually making more money from it. So, and on top of that, you're in this world where like the rise of supermarkets in the UK, where supermarkets worked out like, if you put milk at the back of the shop and you like do 2-for-1 offers and things, people come in for the milk and then they walk back past all of the things which the supermarket make good margins on, purchase them on the way out, and the supermarket obviously has a lot of control, control over prices because of the huge amount of milk that they buy. So what was happening was the supermarket was going to the milk processor and saying, hey, we buy all of our milk comes from you, but like this other company has just offered us a price which is a little bit cheaper than you. What can you do? So what are they going to say? That they've got nothing but to say, okay, we'll match it, and then the milk processor thinks, well, actually, there's no margin in it now anymore. So what am I going to do? So they then tell the farmer, sorry guys, but times are tight. We're going to have to put your milk price down. So there's all of this stuff going on, and for me personally, I was sort of like in my late 20s, and I saw like people around me going out of business, and I was sort of questioning like the thing what I loved so passionately was if we weren't like smart about what we were doing here, we were going to like kind of just be the next farmer who was going to exit the industry. So I guess like for me, I guess I've always been a slight rebel, and it didn't always, I think I was definitely a rebel at school, but as I started questioning like and getting frustrated with other farmers, because whenever I spoke to a farmer, they always moan, and it got boring, like listening to another dairy farmer moan about milk price and moan about the weather and like things like like you can't do anything about that. You're just moaning about something else, but nothing is actually happening. So I suppose the frustration of it all, like kind of, I spoke to my wife Dulcie. We talked about like, where are we going with this? Because all we're doing is just working harder and harder and harder to like try and maintain the same, try and make a profit so we can keep investing in our business. So we thought like a great idea was actually not have cows, to continue having cows, but to add something diversified from dairy farming. And the obvious thing at that time was this like growing industry in the free range hen industry in the UK, or free range egg industry in the UK, and like through what we heard from other farmers that it was very profitable, and we looked at our farming and thought, well, we can't grow arable crops, but we could put a big free range hen shed on our marshes and have the chickens go out into the pastures instead of the cows. So with this idea in mind, we thought, well, we haven't got the foggiest about like free range hens. All I remember was like as a child, I had a few hens in the backyard, and I used to get quite excited going and looking at the little box you'd lift up, and you'd see the chicken just sort of popping off the nest, and the chicken always like makes that sort of happy sort of clucking noise when she's laid an egg, and you go there in the morning with your little basket as a kid and you pick the eggs out there. It was like an amazing and I just thought, wow, I could like do that again. It's like instead of having like 6 hens, maybe we'll just go with a shed like that and have 12,000. So we thought, well, we'll do, this is a brilliant idea. We got well excited about this. So one of the things what the free range hen taught me was like, it pushed me away from the farm because I couldn't see the dairy farmers around me. I had to to learn how to do this. You have to you have to speak to people in the industry of free-range hen farming. So we started visiting free-range hen farmers, not that far away, but just a bit further than the Waveney Valley. So we drive out an hour, 2 hours from the farm and visit these hen farmers, ask them questions. We started to learn the industry. But the interesting thing is when we were out there, we saw the big shed, but we also started to see this other little sort of thing, which was
It actually looks even better.
probably isn't it? And it was these little sheds what these farmers had put near the side of the road. Just the end of the drive from where the big shed was. They put this little garden shed style thing, and you'd see this sort of free-range eggs. And I stepped inside one of these, looked in there. It was very basic, just a shelf with some trays of eggs and a little honesty box, and that was it. And as I was talking to this free-range hen farmer, cars kept coming up the drive, and the person would get out, go in, get some eggs, get in the car and drive off again. And I was amazed actually how many people were doing that. And I said, do you mind me asking, but why do people come to your farm to buy eggs? Why don't they just go to the shop? And the farmer said, I'm not really sure, to be quite honest. He said, but I get the feeling it's because they like supporting farmer. They like to come to the farm and they like to see the hens and have that connection with the farm. And I said, so there's quite a few people coming on here. How much, do you mind me asking, how much do you make a week? He said, we make about £500 cash. I thought, which in today's inflated money is probably about 6,000 or something. But it was quite a lot of money, and for doing very little. And I thought, well, hang on, the farmer, he's got his hens, he gets these eggs, he puts them there, and then someone comes and buys them, and they use them for cooking and doing stuff with. It's that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? As a farmer, you make food to sell to someone, to purchase it, to buy it, to eat it. But we never thought like that in the world of dairy. We always thought produce milk to put in a big tank for a lorry to take away to some milk processing factory somewhere many miles from our farm to turn it into bottles of milk. So we thought, well, we'll go back. We went back home and thought, actually, do we actually need to make free range? Do we need to do a free range hen shed when actually we could actually just experiment with doing the same thing with our milk? So we did exactly that. We bought a garden shed and bought a pallet of poly bottles, some luggage tags off off Amazon, and we printed our own little label. And that label, which is that one there, it says Johnny's Girls, and it just says cow, farmer, you, and so no one in between. It's the cow to the farmer, to the person buying the bottle of milk, and we wrote a few words about the farm on it. And a lot of our sort of friends and neighbours, they thought it was a really stupid idea. It wasn't going to work. They told us every reason why the shed was going to fail. People would just buy it from the supermarket. It's far easier to go and get the milk there. But we thought there was a difference because our milk tasted really good. Because when we drank it ourselves, and it had a great flavour to it. It was unprocessed. It was raw. I thought we sold that milk and we put it in a bottle which didn't look boring. So every bottle of milk in the UK at that point looked boring. It just made it deliberately. I'm sure it was deliberate. It was cheap. It looked cheap. We thought we'll make our bottle look different and special. So we did that, and in August 2011, we put the 30 litres of milk in there, and in the same day, all 30 litres sold. We charged £1 a litre, and just because it's easy maths, and £30 was in that tin at the end of the day, and it just it just made me so happy. I was like, we were producing 6,000 litres at the time in that the same day, and I was just like so excited just about the 30 litres what we sold in that shed. So we did it on day 2. We sold it again. We did it on day 3. We started putting more milk in the shop, and then we put a little comments book, and people started writing nice things about it. And then like for the first time, like it just made total sense. Like, you know, why we do what we do. We're farmers because we produce food, and food, you know, we're producing food for people to come and get, and you know, that's what a farmer is about. It's making food, but we didn't ever connect the person buying the food from us making it. But the first time ever we did, and the sales grew, and like publicity, you know, got more and more publicity. This little garden shed. But eventually, from the popularity of the milk, people started stealing it. So we weren't going to be beating though, because we thought we'll put a vending machine in there and put the bottles of milk inside the vending machine. But as we started researching, we come across this like interesting thing happening over in Italy and Eastern Europe, was the milk dispenser machine. So what was going on was people were buying glass bottles and taking their bottle to the machine, filling it up themselves. So we hadn't seen one of these in the UK, so it was a bit of a gamble. But we contacted this Italian firm, went over and bought this machine, brought it back to the UK, and stuck it in there. It was a bit of a gamble. It was about £6,000, but it just took off, and people then started talking about coming to the farm and, you know, getting milk from the iron cow, and it then started gaining interesting stories in newspapers locally, and then it got nationally, TV, and on the BBC, and then, well, I mean, believe it or not, we had the Wall Street Journal come over and did a story on our vending machine. And I've got I've got the paper to prove it. I've got a bottle of our milk on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I don't know why or how, but it just happened. And then it got into farming press, and the farmers started contacting us and saying, you know, once they told them we were selling our milk for £1 a litre, with not a lot of work involved, they were contacting me and saying, where do you get this machine from? And I said, well, actually, I could probably sell you the machine. So I then started selling vending machines from Italy. So I started speaking to other farmers and selling these vending machines, and seeing these amazing things happen, dairy farmers who are probably going out of business, and all of a sudden they put one of these machines on their farm, and it just transformed their business. Farmers who are on the outskirts of London and busy places on roundabouts, and just seeing that transform their business. It was just such an amazing, you know, feeling to see something what, you know, you had something to do with, and seeing someone else doing really well from it. The annoying thing was that it didn't really make much money, and I just started having farmers phone me up after a year telling me on a Saturday afternoon, my vending machine's broken, what do I do? So it started to drive me a bit crazy. So eventually I had to question, what am I? Am I a dairy farmer, or am I a machine salesman? So we ended up parting company with the vending machine side of the business, and someone else took that on. But what we learned from the shop was you know, we've got all of this milk. Could we make that milk into something else other than just selling it as raw milk? Because there's only so much raw milk you could really, you know, our cat, we got to about 150 to 200 litres a day, and it just kind of sat there at that. But then everything made sense. You know, the future of our business was about you know, that big tank of milk. Rather than thinking about having more cows or getting more litres from cows or spending money on big tractors, let's focus on how do we add value to that tank of milk which we produce each day. And cheese seemed to be the obvious thing, because nobody was making it in our area, and I heard a few good things from farmers who did make cheese and sold it. So we started telling our friends and neighbours, family, and my wife's uncle heard about our ideas of making cheese, and he happened to have a shop in London called Neal's Yard Whole Foods, and his shop was next to a cheese shop called Neal's Yard Dairy, and he said, well, I know the guy who owns a cheese shop next to where my shop used to be. He said, I'll put you in touch with him. He's a guy called Randolph Hodgson. He's done like some good stuff with cheese in the UK. So he got us in touch with Randolph, and Randolph said, come and meet me at like this new project we're doing with this like unpasteurized Stilton called Stitchelton. And he invited me up to Nottinghamshire. So I met up with Randolph and this cheesemaker guy who had an American accent called Joe Schneider, and as we sort of walked around and looked, it just kind of all made sense. It's like, this is the kind of thing what we could have on our farm. It's like, there's the dairy farm and there's this old building next to the dairy farm, you know, it just seems so simple. Like what they're doing here, we could do at our farm. And as we visit that farm, we then visit some more, like Lincolnshire Poacher, Tunworth, Stinking Bishop. There's sort of several cheeses we visit, and we started to see these same things in common, and it just was so exciting, and I just fell in love with like cheese and that connection from cheese to farming, and like you know, it just felt so right, like you know, that we could do this. And from visiting cheesemakers, they kept saying, you know, you probably ought to go and see Neal's Yard Dairy in London, you know, get some advice from them. So that's what was the next step. So we went down to, we got in contact with Bronwyn Percival, who's the buyer at the time of Neal's Yard, and we went and had a look at the Borough Market shop and saw all these British Isles cheeses, and there in the middle sat this French Brie de Meaux. It just stood out as like a sore thumb, you know, like it shouldn't be there, and it just, at that point, it just seemed obvious. It's like, you know, the question then was, what cheese do you want us to make? And everyone was pointing to this Brie. So, which was one of the best things what we'd ever done, rather than saying, hey, I'm here, I want to make a cheddar. You know, it was like, what cheese do you want us to make? So from that idea, we were going to make a Brie. We then started questioning, how do you make a cheese as good as the French? And sorry, Austin, I was just going to point at Evan. So I got in touch with this guy who's like doing some great things, like one or two British farmhouse cheesemakers were learning, like this guy from France who could speak English and was a cheese teacher, told you how to make cheese. So we contacted Ivan and said, would you be interested in making, developing a bloomy rind cheese like Brie de Meaux? And he said, yes, I would. He said, you know, if you want to make a cheese as good as that, there's some really important things you need to get right. And he said, like, the most important thing of all was, like, what milk do you have? And I said, well, we have milk from Holsteins. And he said, what's the fat and protein? And I said, well, 3% protein, 3.7% fat. He said, oh, this is not going to work. Sorry, in a French accent. And he said, sorry, this is not going to work. I go, oh. So he really deflated me. I go, so what do I need to do? And he said, well, I'd advise you. He said, it's not easy, but you need to get cows which produce good milk for cheese making. So in the UK, we like drinking milk. So everything's geared around like liquid rather than solids, which is the important part of making cheese. So he suggested a French breed, which was this cow here, the Montbéliard. So we thought, right, we're going to definitely do it. So we committed to like this idea. We were going to like change part of our herd to this French breed, which was a bit crazy. All the other farmers thought I was completely nuts, and they thought within a year we were going to be beef farmers. And so we got in touch. We eventually found this contact in France who was a Montbéliard dealer, and we got in touch with him, and he said, "Yeah, I'm happy to sell you some cows." He said, "Meet me at Geneva Airport, and we'll we'll go and look at some heifers together. So I did just that. I said, I'll meet you next Thursday. So I got on a plane to Geneva, and then he took me around all these herds and in beautiful areas, cows with bells, and the things what you see in movies. And I saw these cows, and I just fell in love with them. I thought, yeah, this is like the old cow what we used to have before Holsteins. Sturdy. They don't give so much milk, but they never die. And I could see look at this girl, the determination. She's determined, and so I got carried away. He said, how many do you want to buy? And I said, well, how many fits on a lorry? And he said 36. So I said, I'll buy 72. So we bought 2 lorry loads, and we went around all these small farms purchasing these cows. And come home, I told my father, I said, got 72 cows on the way. He said, so how much is that going to cost? I said, well, about £130,000. But we did. The way we did it, we sold some of our Holsteins, which actually come to more money than the Montbéliards because they give more milk. So actually, it worked out all right, other than the fact that we had cows that didn't give much milk. So what was going to pay the bills? I don't know. We worked that bit out later. So we got these cows. The French lorry drivers turned up. Remember the morning? It was a very special morning. These 2 huge lorries turned up. Very tired French driver got out of the cab. First thing he did was rolled up a cigarette and started smoking, and expecting us to unload them. And I said, no, can we take them down to the marshes, because I'm really worried that the cows might have disease and they'll give disease to our cows, and we might, so I'm a bit cautious. So let's get them away and just ease them in gently. So I made him take them down to these boggy marshes. These drivers were not happy. There was the boughs of the oak trees were hitting the tops of the lorry, and we just got to the last bit, and the lorry turned around and got stuck, and these guys, they were just they just got out and started smoking more, and questioning how we were going to get the cows out. But eventually we got them out. It was all right. The cows were fine. They spoke French. They didn't respond to me when I called them. I would say, come on, like you do, like a cow comes when you usually say that. Come on. None of these cows even lifted their heads up. So I went on the internet, and I thought, well, maybe it's because I'm just speaking to him in English. And nah, it can't be. So I typed in come on in French, and it said allez or something like that. So I went back to the cows, allez, and they all put their heads up and came to me. Eventually they worked out English as well. So we've got the cows in place, and then we start this building project on our old milking parlour. So in there, it's the same picture of my father and my uncle in that old shed. And we converted this old barn, 16th century barn, into cheese making, inspired by the Stichelton dairy. We had this old barn too, and we converted that. It's next to the milking parlour, really close. The milk comes fresh from the milking parlour. Into the cheese making building. Again, we did it all via gravity. Things what I learned, from other cheese makers is if you did it again, what would you do? And everyone said try and not damage the fat and the proteins. Try and get the milk straight from the parlour into the cheese making vats with as little damage or time as possible. And I still to this day, I think that is one of the three things what make great cheese. What I see as the most important 3 things. Is the control over the whole process, being the farmer and the cheese maker, and having that control from the land to the cow to the cheese, and the proximity of the cheese making to the dairy, to the farm, and the gentleness. And that, I still believe to this day that is the 3 things what make good cheese above everything else. So we got the building ready. Ivan got him on a plane in May 2013, cheese making equipment arrived from France. Next slide. And day one, there's Ivan, myself, made a very small batch of cheese, made it in the recipe of Brie de Meaux, and cheese making went really well. First 2 batches great, and then Ivan went home. and then the cheese became inconsistent, and it was frustrating because there wasn't really anyone making that cheese in the UK. And we started to, bit by bit, I started to learn the basics to begin with, but was always trying to, question why things happened the way they did. And I would very often spend every month, I would come down to Neal's Yard Dairy, and these guys were always helpful, and when things were difficult, we'd sit down and question it. We'd look at the Brie de Meaux and we'd look at our cheese and what's the difference? And if you keep pushing and you keep trying to find the answers, they do eventually come. And there's an opportunity come every so often. I got an invite to France and saw Brie de Meaux being made. And one of the things what I always what we went into cheese making was because we wanted to replace the Brie de Meaux with a British version. But what I actually saw when we went to France was actually what I expected was quite small cheese making, and it was nothing like that. And the Brie de Meaux was actually not a farmhouse cheese at all. It was on the whole, what I saw from the ones I visited, they were quite big, more industrial cheeses. So I thought actually what we're doing is actually is not just about replacing this French Brie with a British one. It was about actually we're standing up for a farmhouse free soft bloomy rind cheese producer, which is actually, when I look at the ones in France, they just didn't really seem to be there. So to me it made what we were doing more special, because we were trying to do something which didn't seem to exist at all, of making this Brie de Meaux style cheese, albeit it being in the UK. We were trying to make it in being quite unique in being a true farmhouse bloomy rind cheese. So the cheese, as the years have gone by, we've got better, managed to meet great French cheesemakers from France, and people give us advice, and bit by bit we've got, what's the next slide? It's where we are today, where we've managed to, what's the next one? We've got a herd of predominantly Montbéliard cows. We grow, most of the food, what we feed our cows, we grow on farm, which we're working towards. We want to eventually become 100%, what we grow on the farm, is a sufficient amount of food for our cows, to try and keep, everything in that one place rather than buying in things. So it's not just about the cheese, it's about farming practices, and what we see is what we should, as farmers or food producers, what we feel is the right approach for the future, and that's what we want to try and work towards, do our little bit to try and what we see is the right way forward. This is some of the sort of cheese making teams, so we haven't changed anything from the early days of just making it a couple of us. So we've got a bigger team. As you can see, it's still all done by hand. So there's the balance of as you grow in size and the more cheese you make, it's there is always a sort of you feel like you should bring more machinery in, because you can cut down on labour and things. But there's a fine balance between a specialist artisan cheese and an industrial one, and you have to be very careful at where does the artisan thing finish and when does industrial start. And so you have, we've felt we need to be conscious of that, so that we trying to always make consistent cheese, but doing it by hand you never get quite consistent cheese. But that makes I think speciality cheeses like you guys have got here, that's what makes that cheese special, and that is what I think is the difference. So we've stuck to our guns and continued to make the cheese in the same way. Got a bigger team now, and we've just put this cow on here. This cow's called Austin, and dedicated to Austin here, Austin the cow. So next slide. Yeah, this is just from the cheese making building. Like, this is a reflection out to the window. The cows outside, us cutting the curds. It's mostly the same thing, but it's very much a hands-on thing. We put this slide here of us tasting the cheese. It's something what we religiously do every Friday, because that we feel is time well spent. Like, you could argue like we're just having a jolly eating cheese on a Friday, but we see that's a really important thing to. It's like steering. You're on the road and you're driving and you're steering, but as soon as you stop steering, it doesn't take long to start to drive towards the edge of the road. And that's the same with cheese making. Like, you never quite keep in the middle of the road at any one point. You're always slightly going left or right, but it's just like making sure that when you taste the cheese, like if you're starting to go that way, you just draw it in again. So it's one of the sort of most important things, I think, with trying to be a specialist artisan cheese, but trying to be consistent. And this is some of the things what we're doing with the environment and the things around the farm. Some of the things we've done, like Emily here Emily done things like focus on like ways of bringing more habitats onto our farm and our marshes, like putting more trees in and like keeping cows away from riverbanks and places where wildlife thrive. To like when with our new cow shed, when we went to concrete the floor, we thought like let's actually like utilize the heat from the muck. So the cows, when you litter the yard, you put straw down, the cow poos and pees in the straw, and that once you get those three things combined, you then start the composting effect, and you get a lot of energy and a lot of heat from that once the bacteria starts breaking down that muck. So what we come up with this crazy idea that we put a mile of water pipe under the shed, just below the concrete, and lo and behold, the muck, which was 43 degrees, actually the heat of the went through the concrete and into the water. So we use our cow yard to heat water up to near on 40 degrees when it goes into the milking parlour, which it's just all free heat. It's just heat which is going to be lost into the atmosphere, and we're heating up water. So think of it in easy numbers, like it costs us £20 a day to heat the water to wash the milking parlour pipes. So that's £10 each milking. So of that £10, the first 12 degrees of water, the water coming from the ground is approximately about 12 degrees. So let's call that £1.20. And now the water which is going to be coming from that yard is close on 40p. So you've got £1.20 to £4. And that's every time you have one of those tanks of water, that's the margin you save every time on electricity. So it well and truly paid off. So it was a crazy idea. Another one was the heating the cheese building. Rather than thinking of like, to the size we are now, we would had to have gone into gas or oil, to heat the water. But instead we used a straw burner, because that's something what we can control again from the fields with the straw what we bring in. So it's just a glorified wood burner, but that then heats all of the water around the farm, from this tank here. And then this year we should be 100%. We're already we've got a 150 kilowatt system of solar panels on our cow shed. And this year we're putting another 150. So we should be self-sufficient on electricity this year. And then down the end, some things just don't quite work out. We bought these garlic pellets because the idea is the garlic actually reduces methane from cows burping. But in theory it was going to work, but the trouble was the milk tasted like garlic. So if you like garlic-y cheese, then this is the kind of thing you should be feeding the cows. But so it doesn't always work, but the point is we keep trying things. And that's me. Yeah, that's me finished. So there's a picture of where we are now from me with a little Arthur, 1-year-old Arthur, checking out Ticklemore cheese down in Devon, in the research days to where we are now, which is 10 years old, and the amazing, place where we are now, where this cheese is here with you guys, and that's really special that we've managed to get that cheese here, which has always been a bit of a dream over the last few years, and it's quite how you get a cheese of this style across the Atlantic Ocean, but somehow it seems to be working all right at the moment, so that brings us to where we are now. Thank you.
Does anyone have questions?
At what point did you make are you still making the cheese raw milk for the UK market, or?
No, we switched to pasteurize last year. It's just, we got to a stage where like our eggs was so much in one basket, I just didn't feel like, I felt like at the time it was the right call to do.
Yeah.
So it is all pasteurized, and in some ways that has made getting cheese to the US easier, because it's always going to be difficult to try and do both in the same dairy.
You still have the egg stand along with the cheese making process?
Yeah, so we didn't go down the free range hens in the end, but we do sell some eggs from the farm what we got the idea from. But I must admit, I was a bit like, I don't know if you've watched Wind in the Willows, but Toad, like, he gets all these crazy ideas, he goes from one thing to the next. That's kind of a bit like me, but I'm glad, I think the point of the hens is it just which I think is really important to anybody, is that that you can't progress and bring in new ideas without visiting different places and things to stimulate your mind and to bring new ideas in. And I think that was for me like the moment in my life where I moved away from the things I saw around me to see something different, which then triggered a new idea. And I think it's and to this day I love traveling, because I see a random thing and you think that's such a great idea, and how could what I do with my little world, how could I do something in a sort of dairy way with whatever that person is doing. So that's the great thing about traveling, I think. So
How long did it take you to nail down your recipe? How long did it take for you to feel super confident about your recipe, and sort of being confident from start to finish, this is gonna work?
yeah, I think it took about 3 years to get consistent. The first year it was very up and down. Second year we started to get more consistency, but there was things what we just didn't understand. There was so many question marks still, and as we got into sort of year 3 and 4, good little moments happen, like Thierry Lerendu, the French teacher from Normandy, just random stuff happen if you keep pushing and searching. He was this brilliant camembert guy who taught people how to make camembert, and he was he contacted Bronwyn at Neal's Yard saying, I'd like to come to the UK and spend a couple of months with somebody who could teach me English, and I would in exchange teach them how to make cheese. And so Bronwyn contacts me and says, there's this French guy, he seems fairly legit, would you be prepared? And so we get this Thierry, and he spends 2 months with us, teaching us how to, so that then propels you to a different level. You start to understand new things. I think that one of the things which to me was one of the final sort of missing links for us was not understanding our milk, fats and proteins. So it's something I would always recommend to anyone getting into cheese, that buying a bit of equipment which will tell you your fat and protein on a day-to-day basis, it just open, you know, it's the hidden stuff you don't understand. It just tells you straight away, and once we did a whole year of analysing fat and protein, we then saw the trends of the ups and downs through the seasons, and we could then adjust our make to get more consistency still, because we found cheeses in the summertime were drier than the cheeses in the wintertime, and actually we ended up working out it was the fat which went down from the lush grass, which then made less fat and more lower saturated fat, which then in turn made drier cheeses because the moisture drained out of the cheese quicker. So, you know, and I think from that point on, we got more consistent. So that was probably 4 or 5 years in. And I think also it's really difficult when you're like doing it on your own and you're trying to do so many other things and you're juggling things around. And again, like having a good team of people, and like, you know, Mark and Tom are two cheese makers. They make cheese every day, so they get really good at it and they can focus on it, which is something which I struggle to do, trying to do many things. So you know, it all has to come from many things, but you know, it's learning the process, but equally like having the right people and a good team, you know, all sort of like honed in on trying to achieve the same goal. I think you know, that you shouldn't ever forget that that's a huge important part to play.
So how soon were you able to bring your cheese to market when you first were tinkering with the
Well,
recipe?
one of the things we did really well was like including the Ilsyard Dairy from the beginning, because those guys then bought into what we were doing, because they followed us on that story and that journey right from the beginning. So like the first batch of cheese like went down to London and was like there in front of like people who love cheese. So it was actually, it was quite easy to get like the early sales, and also like, you know, like the story I've told tonight, you know, like the story itself is really important. And you know, at the time, like buying French cows didn't seem like, it just seemed the obvious thing to do, but actually it made a good story. And that story, believe it or not, ended up, I don't know if you ever listened to BBC Radio 4, but there's a program on there which has been going for many, many years called The Archers, and the scriptwriter of The Archers contacted me and heard about our story about us getting French cows, and they actually put it into a story on The Archers. So one of the characters on The Archers goes out to France and buys Montbéliard cows and brings back and like makes cheese. That story is based on our story. Another thing which we did really like good from the beginning was from the raw milk we got a story with Anna Hill from the Farming Today programme, and I kept Anna's contact details. So when we went into cheese making, I said to Anna, would you be interested in doing a story? And you know, like what you'll get is like me being in a panicky kind of state on day one, and this French guy, and on a radio program actually the voices of like me being panicky and a French guy like in a French accent like trying to tell me like don't do that, do this. It actually became a really good half-hour episode on which was listened to by farming sort of foodie folk, sort of 3.5-4 million people listened to it that morning. So you know, it's like little things like that at the start which sort of like just get you going. So people like, initially you have to believe in the story, so you hear the story and it sounds a good story. Cheese could be crap, but it was the story what got us to begin with, and you know, trying to set things up correctly. So I think that's what really got the whole thing started.
You talked a lot about how dairying in England has shifted over the past few decades. Where do you sort of see it going in the future?
I feel positive about it. So dairy's been having a hard time recent years. I don't know if you find it in the US as well, but it's not got the greatest of press back in the UK. And Arla, who are the biggest milk buyer, are actually, you know, they want to be net zero, by 2045. So they're on a journey to try and get there. So actually, the dairy industry in the UK is doing some great things, I think, in pushing towards trying to do the right thing in a sustainable way for the future. I see the future is, and which has happened over the last 10 years, is that a lot of farmers have started, like, you know, dairy farmers have started like selling their own milk, and that's an easy step into on-farm processing, selling milk. The hardest step is cheese, and I think there is potential that there could be more cheesemakers start up, you know, farmers into cheese, which is probably the best chance, you know, because you've got the combination of the control over the milk and, you know, it's just the leap into food production. I think it will go two ways, and more extreme in two ways, that there'll be big milk dairy farms producing a lot of milk, but then there'll be the other side of it, which will be you know, more diversified dairy farming, which will be making interesting products, and you know, certainly in the UK there's an awful lot more, you know, interesting bottles of milk turning up, you know, people making yogurt and you know, all of these products. So I think that will grow.
Do you still make like different size formats of the wheels? And like, is there a reason that you picked like this format in the US?
Yeah, good question. So we started off making the Brie de Meaux, the 3 kilogram wheel, and then within a few months, people started questioning, like, can you make a 1 kilogram cheese, because restaurants is a bit of like a big lump of cheese for a restaurant to buy. So we then started making this 1 kilogram size, and then a couple of years later we then started getting people asking us, do you think, because we don't like have it cut and wraps or like part to our shop, do you think you could just do like a little one which you could buy the whole thing, like a camembert size? So we then ended up doing that too. And then actually we ended up doing more and more things, all based around Baron Bigod. So we did like Baron Bigod truffle, which was just quite easy. We made our own like mascarpone and infused it with truffle and put it together, and that was another thing from the same cheese. And then at like silly things like Valentine's Day, we make a heart cheese called Baron Bigod I Love You. And that, you know, that's really successful. So, but the reason we picked the 3 kilogram was, I think it just is the best cheese. Actually, flavour-wise, it's the best cheese, but it's not necessarily the easiest cheese, because you've got to cut it, and you know, no one's going to want to buy a whole 3 kilogram. I think also, like, the cheese is mature in a slightly different way. So a smaller Bloomy Rhine cheese will mature quicker. The big one matures slower. And like, actually what we're learning, you know, there's still learning stuff, and like learning just in the last couple of days is that, you know, we're starting to see that same thing in common, that if the cheese weighs about 3 kilograms to 3.1 kilograms, it matures slightly slower, and versus like a cheese which is 2.8, 2.7, the cheese matures faster. So the mold needs to have curd to work on to keep it fresh. As soon as that last bit of curd goes, that's the tipping point, and the cheese starts to, like, well, it's composting eventually, isn't it? You know, so you've kind of got a window, probably a couple of weeks, you know, from like when the cheese like fully breaks down, in my opinion. So the beauty about the 3 kilogram is it travels better, and I think we're really pleased that like the results, what we've seen so far, that, you know, like sticking to the 3 kilogram seems to be the right thing for now. Having it in, you know, the other thing was the paper. Like, we spent quite some time on that duplex paper, you know, like trialing different papers. Again, it seems to just get it here without like the cheese going too wet, or, you know, like you get moisture in underneath the paper. Having that moisture just creates this little environment where the moisture and the rind, it sort of brings out the brevibacterial linens in the cheese, which makes a kind of wash rind flavour, which also is quite challenging when you've got penicillium and geotrichum and brevibacteria all working in the same place. What ends up happening is the penicillium kind of dies, and it goes like a like grey and like slimy, whereas the Brevibacterial Linen and Geo work better. But ideally, you want to actually have the cheese where the rind is still quite dry, squidgy, where it's got that Geo and Penicillium combination. And another little thing which we've noticed over time is what we term the waves of joy, where if you look at the cheese rind, it's got like little ripples, and I'm not sure why the Geotrichum does that, but when it does do that, it's telling you it's probably going to taste really good. So you kind of like, it's almost like as you see brie every day, you kind of like look at the cheese and you know what it's going to taste like before you even touch it. And like when you see a cheese which is white, bloomy mold, thick, you know what the flavours are going to be for that cheese. So it's, you know, it's small things like that which are the differences, I think, with getting a really good brie.
Have you thought about making different kinds of cheese past brie style?
Yeah, so like the sort of like the side of me of like loves ideas and like, you know, the Toad of Wind and Willows sort of character. I want to like make a hard cheese and a blue cheese because it sounds really exciting and interesting. But sometimes you have to like say to yourself like, you know, what's better, to try and make lots of cheeses and doing them average, or just try and be one cheese and like try to be the best in the world at one thing, which kind of does make more sense, but it's just harder to discipline yourself to do that. So I think we are going to stick with that cheese, not like move too far around that. But we are actually playing with another cheese, a smaller cheese, possibly a bit like a long sort of like, you know, 150 gram cheese, but it would be in the same family as the Baron. So, you know, it's really important that your cheese building, you know, the environment that building has, that you shouldn't bring in other molds to that building. So blue molds, bad news, mucor and things like that. So, you know, you've got to be very careful with the environment, you know, that early stage of maturing with the cheese before it gets any mold on it. So all of those things you need to consider. And when you just look around at, like, you know, some of the best cheeses out in the world, you know, do you see Marcel Petit like starting to mature Camembert? You know, they focus on their one thing and do it well. Right, thank you very much. I'm sorry if I take too much.